And under old business, we have minutes for the July 29th, 2020 meeting. I was not there, so I'll abstain from this, but I'd accept a motion for.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of July 29th, 2020. As I stated, I will abstain. All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay. Motion passes. 1.2, budget discussion with Gordon Thomas Honeywell, Government Affairs. And I believe Josh is on the line. Is with us?
Yes, Josh is here. And we just need to make sure he's unmuted.
Okay.
So I'll go ahead and introduce briefly the discussion. So I know it's August, but January of 2021 will be here before we know it. And so we're coming up on a long year. This is going to be a budget year where the legislature will do the 2021 to 2023 biennial budgets. And so it's time for us to really start preparing for the legislative session, what our priorities might be. Obviously, there are some things that are unknown, particularly as it pertains to COVID. And those priorities, will largely be in tandem with WASAC, and we'll be developing, as we get closer to January. But really, I wanted to have this discussion to talk about priorities that are going to be unique to Clark County, and then also give Josh a chance to sort of talk about what the legislative landscape is going to be looking like for 2021.
So good morning, everyone. I think I'm getting.
Good morning, Josh.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Nice to see you and all the other counselors and staff as well. What a strange year. We've been in touch with Lindsay, but I think like everybody else, it's just odd to not have been in more communication throughout the year. So I am Josh Weiss with Gordon Thomas Honeywell. We're your state county lobbyists. Annika Vaughn works with me and she's on vacation today. And Rebecca, you can go ahead to the next slide. So Lindsay did a great introduction. The purpose of today is to do a little bit of retrospective. Usually we would do a full end of session presentation. We didn't really have a chance to do that this year because of COVID. So we'll intertwine a little bit of what happened last year into what's happening right now and how I'll project into the 21 session. And just to emphasize what Lindsay already said, it really is not too early, particularly this year, to be started with this discussion. And I will just say, please do just feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have questions. So last year, 2020 session was the supplemental session. It was a really busy supplemental year. There was a very healthy budget forecast for the state. They did end up spending, even after the governor pared down their budget, they still spent an additional $726 million in the operating budget above the baseline. Usually in a supplemental year, you won't see a whole lot of new legislation. But this year we saw more bills in the supplemental session than were introduced in the original session, first session of the biennium. So all of the 2019 bills carried over, as well as over 2,000 bills, new bills. So just extraordinarily busy session. Towards the end of session, many discussions were sort of brought to a halt because there was the recognition that there was not going to be budget to sustain them. Having said that, homelessness, housing was a key area of investment, which I know the county was keenly interested in. $160 million, and that's in the operating budget on top of what was spent in the capital budget was spent in homelessness. Right at the end of session, the legislature passed House Bill 2965, which appropriated $200 million to state agencies and for local public health for COVID response. The report on how that got spent is on OFM's website, but the reality is that those dollars just went out very quickly and were spent very quickly. That was even before the CARES Act funding was provided. I'll just say that we provided a detailed written end of session report. If you do have questions, it includes all the bills that we tracked for you, positions that we took, all of the priorities that we worked on for you. And that's there as a reference if you're ever interested in it, or I'm always happy to answer questions as well. Go ahead, next slide, Rebecca. So where we currently stand right now, we do see budget challenges and opportunities. You've all heard, obviously, about the revenue prediction that the state is likely to face $4.5 billion in the current biennium and an additional 4.3 in the next biennium. The February forecast, just an indication of how quick this turned around. The February forecast projected $1.5 billion above the baseline. They, as I mentioned, they didn't spend all of that, which was good because it turned around very quickly in June. But the point of the February forecast is that there is additional revenue in the underlying budget, and they have $3 billion in their budget stabilization account or their rainy day fund. So they have a $4.5 billion problem right now, but they can make up, a good chunk of that with their rainy day fund. That has been a lot of the debate you've seen this summer about whether to come back to a legislative session, special session this summer. Really the governor arguing that they should wait for the federal government to come back and see if there's going to be additional resources that could help patch up this hole. There is an argument out there that seems to be prevailing that with the $3 billion in the rainy day fund, with additional funding resources, there's not the need to come back immediately and make changes to their budget. Just by way of context, the 21 operating budget, right now our overall budget is over $53 billion. So though they have a almost $9 billion problem, per biennium they spend 53. I have seen numbers that indicate that this level of reduction is actually not as much as the state had to make during at least the second biennium in the Great Recession. I think the main thing about all of these numbers is just the level of uncertainty and the reality that we don't know how long this is going to go or how deep the impact will be. 60% of their budget is dedicated to specific uses that can't be changed. For example, Medicaid obligations or the McCleary decision or other court decisions. We do think that state shared revenues are at risk for counties and cities. And at a minimum, we do not think there will be new funding available for local governments. The one exception I would say to that is ongoing discussions about public health funding. But otherwise, it's not going to be a good year to be making operating budget requests. Different story in the capital budget. There will be capital budget resources available. It will be probably smaller than the last biennial operating or capital budget that we saw. Because the capital budget is a function of the operating budget, they have to pay for their bond obligations out of the operating budget, so they can't bond as much when the operating budget goes down, but there will still be capital budget resources available. The transportation budget is also a mixed bag, kind of bleak. There is discussion still going on about a new transportation revenue package. Both the House and the Senate are talking about that. The reality is that after I-976, they have a hole in their transportation budget that they were able to patch up this last session in the supplemental year, but it was only a short-term fix. They have that hole still to address. They have the obligation of the Supreme Court to fix state culverts, which is a multi-$100 million problem at the state level. And then gas tax revenue, which is the major source of transportation funding in the state, is also being reduced because of the COVID, the fact that people aren't traveling as much and not buying gas and not paying tolls. So they really do need to do a new revenue package just to patch this hole that they have. In addition, there's talk and conversation about new projects being funded as well. I do have in there that there is still the possibility that the Supreme Court could overrule I-976. That's been argued at the Washington Supreme Court. We're just waiting on the decision now. We will know that by the 21 session though. If that does happen, it will be less pressure, but I do still think there will be conversation around a new transportation package. Last thing to note on this, and I think you're all aware of this, the Senate in their proposal from the last 2 years did include either a carbon tax or a cap and trade system as a revenue source for a new transportation package. The House is looking at that as a possible revenue source as well in their discussions. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, next slide. So looking ahead to 2021, they are officially saying that a special session, if it happens, will happen after the November general election. Personally, I think it's extremely unlikely at this point that they have a special session at all. By the time they get to the November general election, they'll be so close to January, and they'll be wanting to, there's just not much time to do very much between November and January. I don't think there'll be a lot of impetus for that at the time. It is very uncertain at this point how the legislature is going to meet in 2021. Other states that have held legislative sessions have had COVID cases result from that. You're seeing all virtual legislative meetings this fall. There's definitely conversations going on about how exactly they will meet. There's some talk about maybe legislators will come to Olympia, be essentially quarantined in their offices, except when they have to vote, at which time they would come out to the floor and be arranged in a socially distant way. There's some conversation about whether or not they would do everything virtual, although there is a real logistical problem for particularly some Eastern Washington legislators where they just don't have the broadband to actually participate virtually. So at this point, uncertainty is really the word of the day. Last night we had our primary election. I mentioned already the November general election coming up. I think, the primary election is a different election than the general election, but if we're going to use it as prognostication for any possible trends statewide, I think what we would say is that there's probably not the same blue wave that we anticipated or that was being talked about. It looks like Democrats will pick up at least one, maybe two seats in the Senate. They, in all likelihood, will be even in the House. So keep in mind that Democrats have a very strong majority in the House in particular, but in the Senate also. So it's going to be getting more Democratic, but not at the level I think that people thought it could have. One of the things that we're seeing after last night is that red districts are getting more red and blue districts are getting more blue. So we're seeing moderate Democrats being challenged from left-leaning Democrats in the 5th District of King County and the 11th District of King County, where you have moderate Democratic incumbents losing to more progressives. You also have in Whatcom County in the 42nd District, which is traditionally a red district that had started to turn blue, going back to red. And then you have the 19th District, not very far from you at all, where it's been traditionally a moderate Democratic district. One House seat flipped last 2 years ago, and it's looking like very likely you could lose both a Senate seat and a House seat, Republicans controlling entirely the 19th district. So I think just the bottom line on this is that we fully anticipate having strong Democratic majorities in the legislature. I think obviously the Governor Inslee will win re-election and you'll have control of the governor's mansion again as well. We are seeing the legislature definitely start to identify some priorities that we know they'll be working on. Obviously, the big one is law enforcement and public safety reform. In fact, you hear some legislators even talking about the idea that this could be a bigger priority than their budget problems. So this will definitely be, we will see multiple bills on police reform this session. This would be the one issue I should say that if there were going to be a special session, I actually think this could be an issue that did bring them back this fall for a special session. If they came around consensus collaboration on a bill on police reform, I could see them coming back early and doing that. Gma reform is being talked about this summer. There was a formal work group that was proposed this session that had to be halted because of the budget. But there are stakeholder discussions going on through Representative Fitzgibbon, who's the chair of the House Environment Committee, has jurisdiction on these issues, as well as Joe Tovar, who is a consultant with the University of Washington that did the Ruckelshaus House study, if you recall that process. He's really pushing to continue picking up from the Ruckelshaus House report and bringing legislative proposals forward from that. So I would not be surprised at all if GMA is a legislative topic in 2021. We also, the Joint Oregon-Washington Legislative Committee is actively underway now. They just held a meeting in July. They have another one coming up. I think it's this week or maybe next week. But in the next couple of weeks, stakeholder work is going on in that as well. Additional social justice and equity issues focusing around housing segregation is really starting to heat up as well. This has to do with the issue that because of past land use and housing decisions, we really do have very significant segregation, particularly in some parts of the state. And so how do you, the discussion now is how do you mitigate or rectify those impacts? The multifamily tax exemption issue, which we worked on your behalf last session, could get tied up in this. The whole idea of, how do you encourage more affordable and housing in certain parts of the state, certain districts. And then just finally, the Department of Revenue under legislative direction has started their tax structure work group. I think they've met twice this summer now. They're having a big picture tax reform discussion that will probably not result in recommendations this next legislative session, but the analytical work that they're doing this session will definitely be ready to inform and direct any policy discussions that the legislature might want to undertake prior to the work group making recommendations. And I think I should have said this at the beginning, the conversation here is really focused around how does the state move from being very heavily dependent on sales tax as their major revenue source. How do you make the B&O tax more equitable for businesses? And I think everybody kind of knows, right? It's Democrats are pushing this towards a capital gains or some sort of other tax source for the state. Okay, go ahead, Rebecca. In terms of local government priorities, WASAC and AWC are both focusing right now on developing their 2021 priorities. We have a pretty good glimpse into what they're looking at. The budget impact at city and county level is going to be the primary focus. WASAC in particular is still in the prioritization process, but they really championed making a change to the 1% property tax cap in the past. That discussion we know from legislators will be introduced in 2021. Representative Paulette, who's the chair of the House Local Government Committee, has been working this summer on a fiscal flexibility bill. It really has a menu of options. It takes, I think there's probably a dozen different local option revenue sources and tries to provide additional ways that those dollars can be spent. The 0.09 Economic Development Fund is not in the current bill, but it talked about trying to take certain funds that have supplantation language and removing that from them, providing additional flexibility with your REIT dollars, particularly for affordable housing, and then making the House Bill 1406, which was 2 years ago, the major housing legislation that was providing, making those dollars more usable for affordable housing. I think it's really an open debate about how useful this bill would be. It probably depends a lot on your jurisdiction and which local options you've used. I'm hearing a lot of particularly county clients saying that they don't think it's going to be super helpful. And having worked on fiscal flexibility bills in the past, they can be extremely contentious and hard to move. And if it's not going to be that useful, there's definitely a conversation amongst county lobbyists about whether we should be encouraging counties to be embracing this effort. I already mentioned the law enforcement, public safety reform. The legislature has a task force on this. The governor has a task force on this. I think so. The Washington State sheriffs and police chiefs have come out with a series of ideas as well on behalf of sheriffs and police chiefs. I think there's a question about whether Wasatch and other counties really embrace that proposal, and how you want to position yourself on that discussion is going to be probably fairly important. Related specifically to COVID-19, there are discussions about whether to restructure the emergency management process. The fact that it runs up through this military department has had some county emergency management departments asking about whether it should be its own standalone separate agency, if things would be more streamlined and efficient if it were run in that manner. There's also discussion about making both long-term flexibility for how you comply with the Open Public Meetings Act in this current environment, but also providing additional legislative direction and authority for you to operate more consistently if there is a future emergency like this where we need to go back into this virtual scenario. This is something that we've been pushing the legislature a lot on. We're hoping for special session action on, but we'll not be getting it. We can talk about this in more detail if you want, how it interplays with the emergency proclamation and extension of the proclamations and just the political dynamics around those, if you're interested. But just for now, know that that is a discussion that's happening. I think I'm ready for the next slide, Rebecca. So for our Clark County legislative agenda, on the capital requests, this is really should be, in my opinion, an area to focus on. This is going to 2021 will be a big year for capital budget funding. There will be funding available. On average, in the typical year, the average project receives about $800,000. Sorry, frightened me. That was my cat. We did see, obviously, 2 years ago, with the Tenny Creek project, we received $1.75 million, so way above this $800,000 average. So that's just a good example of the things that we can do in a big budget year for capital budget. We really, recommend that having your full support and ability for whatever project you choose is very important. If we can build on past requests, that would be great. That's always helpful, but not necessary. More advanced in the project is always helpful. Shovel ready is the term that gets used, but the legislature really wants to be the last dollars in. They don't want to be the first dollars in. They want to see that you have enough funding from other sources to ensure that the project is going to get completed. There has been conversation around a bigger capital package focused on really jobs creation and stimulus, but I've not seen any details on that, and I'm not sure what that would look like. In the past, just to get your thinking going, projects that we've been successful on for local government in the capital budget are water sewer projects, public safety facilities, such as sheriff precinct offices, parks, recreation facilities, emergency communication facilities as well. And that's both not just the buildings, but we've had success with the actual radio equipment for emergency communications as well. I would anticipate that affordable housing projects, homelessness, behavioral health facilities similar to the Tenny Creek facility will continue to be well favored. So takeaway here is big opportunity in capital budget. We should be talking about which project we would like to move forward to the legislature. And I'm ready for next slide, which I know is going to be transportation, and talked about this a little already. The project list for a new transportation package, Senator Hobbs has done a pretty thorough job of populating that list of projects. It will be hard, I think, at this point to get new projects put on the list, but I would not say impossible. Particularly if you're related to economic development, or if there's some sort of new project at the state level or connected with the county level that poses safety concerns. I think the other dynamic that you're all well aware of is that the bridge replacement regionally will continue to be a high priority for your legislators. Certainly, the 49th district legislators, this is a very high priority for, obviously, and with them in the majority will probably continue to be a regional priority. We've talked about this before, the challenge of making sort of smaller but still big transportation projects a priority is definitely a challenge right now. It also remains to be seen how much money will actually be available for new projects versus filling the budget holes in the transportation budget that I talked about before. The bottom line on transportation budget is really that I think it's worth making sure that we have a good, firm grasp on what our transportation priorities are and that we're communicating that to the legislature. Sooner is definitely better than later. Shifting to operating budget, it's pretty simple on the operating budget. There's not going to be new money available, and it's really not a good year to be asking for operating dollars. I know that's disappointing because so much of what counties do requires new operating budget funding, particularly you think about indigent defense, those types of expenses, but the state is not going to be passing new dollars down to counties. In fact, I think our biggest concern there is going to be playing defense. It will be a good year to pursue policy proposals. If there's policy legislation that the county is in, this would be a good year to do it. Go ahead, Rebecca. So I know that there's already been some discussion at the county and staff, or at the council and staff level, about some ideas. We know on the operating side that there is the need for funding for your CASA program. Very disappointed by the veto last year. That was really just an impact of the COVID budget situation. I don't think it's likely that we'll see more money from the state for this program this next year, but I know it's important for you. I know there's also the need for better coordination of a variety of different care options for individuals that are at need in the community. This might be, not that CASA is not a compelling program. I think these types of programs are probably more interesting to legislators than some others, but I still think it's going to be an incredibly difficult year to receive new funding for these. Transportation, we've been focusing on the 179th interchange project. The last I saw, it's scheduled for engineering in 2023. We're getting close now to the original schedule that was laid out in the Connecting Washington package. I'm not sure, is 2023 now sufficient? Do we want to be going in and asking for engineering in the 2021 fiscal year? Definitely would want to talk with your public works department and you about, is this still the priority, and tuning that up. I think it's okay if it still is, but if it's not, maybe we want to shift our gears to a different project somewhere else in the county. And I talked before about the Columbia River Bridge. So you can go ahead, Rebecca. So next steps, and I'm getting close to winding up here. So backing up, the first day of session is Monday, January 11th. It will be a long session, 105 days. I should say, I might be the only one that thinks this, but I believe there is a scenario where the legislature comes in January with a pre-agreed upon budget solution for their budget, a police reform solution, and they essentially come in for a very limited period of time to accomplish those two major things, and essentially tell the public that they will come back in the fall to conduct the rest of session after a coronavirus vaccine is available. basically a very abbreviated budget to take care of just very important business, pushing off the rest of policy discussions until the end of the year just because of the COVID situation. We'll see. I'm sure I'll probably be wrong about that, but I think it is something to keep in mind. In the event that there will be limited access during session, I'm not sure what the scenario is going to look like, but the idea of coming up to Olympia and advocating in the same way, person to person in the same way that we used to, seems really unlikely to me. We're having a lot of access this interim over Zoom calls and on the phone with legislators, and that just seems to be the norm. I really think it's important that you're having even more dialogue than we normally recommend with your legislators before session, which makes me, in my ideal world, think that it would be better to have your legislative priorities adopted even earlier this year so that we can be speaking with one voice earlier in the process about what our priorities are. If we could get that done in October, that would be fantastic. We really want some time to make sure that we have our talking points, our materials all ready to go. We saw materials last year, they already weren't taking handouts, or some legislators weren't taking physical handout copies of documents, but we'll still want to put together nice PDF materials that we can be sharing electronically, or even video presentations of projects. I've seen one jurisdiction put together an incredibly nice video presentation on their transportation request that they will be sharing with transportation budget leaders. We'll also want to make sure that we brief the delegation and identify champions for whatever our priorities are that they'll be moving forward. I sort of skipped ahead to this bullet, really thinking creatively about new ways to advocate with the legislature in the event they meet virtually. The budget briefing that we did with the delegation, I think was really a good idea. If there is additional information, I think that having another one of those this late summer, early fall would be a good idea. I was impressed with the number of legislators that did attend that. I thought it was I thought it went well. I also think that we should think about maybe during session, if they're meeting virtually, asking the delegation to have a weekly delegation and county call. We're just not going to have as much access, and we need to be thinking about other ways that we can be having regular communications with them. The other thing that I've been thinking about a lot too is that, having you all prepared even more so to be making phone calls to the legislative delegation. I think we're going to be wanting to do even more of that than we had in the past. Next slide, I think might be the last one. Yeah, so happy to answer questions. I say this every time and I definitely mean it. We really enjoy working with you. It's a privilege to represent you. I think the bottom line is we feel like it's time to get going and setting our agenda, just given the uncertainty that we have, that as much work as we can do this summer is really going to pay off for us. So I'm very happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Josh. I have a question that I wanted to start out because it was intriguing to hear about video presentations for requests, and I'm sure that's probably pretty effective. Would that be something that our staff would have to take care of and get to you? Is that the idea?
I mean, I haven't done one of these. In the example that I had, it was prepared by staff at the jurisdiction. So we would have to talk about that.
Yeah, we'd have to find out who's best to do that if we, did a transportation video or whatever. I'm sure we have some talented people, but at any rate, that was my question. Are there other questions of the counselors?
I should just add too, the reality is it would be no different really than a handout.
Right.
It's really us working in collaboration with your staff.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Sorry to interrupt.
Madam Chair.
Councilor Blum.
Josh, you talked about not likely to add new transportation projects. With gas tax being way down, do you think we need to be actively playing defense to protect some of the projects that we already have some funding for?
Yeah, I really do. I mean, I think having that prioritization is going to be really important. If they have to start taking projects off the list, where would you put your greatest emphasis? I think that is particularly the case if the court upholds Initiative 976. Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, I do have.
Councilor Magnagy?
Thank you. I have one quick question before it is separate and apart from the comments I want to make about your presentation. So the quick question I have is regarding the residual or de facto housing segregation that you said existed and is well documented in places throughout the state. Where are those places in the state that you're referring to?
The example that I have seen is in Seattle. I know that, I guess actually now I think about it, I've seen it from Tacoma as well. It's probably in the larger jurisdictions, but I also have not seen a sort of statewide thorough analysis, just examples.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that it's not necessarily something you've seen that's a huge issue in Clark County.
I haven't seen an example in Clark County, no.
And Madam Chair, go ahead with my comments about the presentation.
Yes.
So thank you. So thanks for that, Josh. This is, I think it's an understatement to say we have a challenging environment, not only between the pandemic, but the deepening blue in our state and lack of checks and balances between the different backs of government here. I really think that in the context of these working groups on tax reform, and obviously that's going to be very challenging for us, whether they're looking at capital gains, carbon taxes, you name it, releasing a cap off of property taxes. In that challenging environment, out of fairness, and I don't know if we can win over our local delegation, but we are so dissimilarly situated here in Clark County. There was a study done years ago on the tax leakage on all the border counties, and by far, Clark County is the hardest hit. You know, with our current tax structure throughout the state, we are at a huge disadvantage. Our sales tax is decremented to such a substantial portion that is what, in my mind, absolutely creates our structural deficit. We cannot tax our way out of it by increasing more taxes on property taxes or other revenue streams. We need relief, just as a matter of fairness, to put us on a level playing field with all the other counties throughout the state in our contributions to the state. I understand that at least the fair approximation is about 0.18%, less than 2%, that we need to withhold here for our local use in order to be similarly situated with the other counties. We will never get over being next door to Portland and there are no sales tax. So I really think that is our future, that we need to continue with that narrative. I understand that previous Senate and House bills have never even made it out of a committee, but this is our lifeblood, the way our tax system is set up right now, and we will always be at a huge disadvantage until there's some formula created where border counties get to keep a greater percentage of their sales tax. So I want to know your thoughts on that as I tee this up, because with these, at least to get these issues before the working group, try to revitalize the bills that never came out of committee or rewrite them in a more palatable way. I know it's a challenging environment right now as they look at these huge revenue shortfalls at the state level. But withholding 0.18% of our sales tax locally would not in any way decrement the state in any way that should be significantly viewed. It's an issue of fairness. So what do you see any way ahead in this coming session that we could move that issue forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right to emphasize the challenge. With the state facing its own deficit, or, depends on how you define deficit, but their own budget problem, I think it's very unlikely to see the state spending any additional money on local governments. We ran into this last year with the 0.09 issue, trying to get the county included in the 0.09 economic development program, that it would cost the state additional resources. I think anything that costs them money is going to be very, very difficult. I think, and hopefully this isn't too blunt, I just think there's going to be a political reality as well that, Clark County has been very lucky in the last 2 years with the current majority to have Democrats from the 49th district that are willing to advocate for the county as well as the 17th and 18th. And I just think that with the blue getting deeper, as we talked about, that making sure that we're able to work in a bipartisan fashion is going to be incredibly important. I know that, I was really pleased with how all of the members of the 49th district were interested and willing to help in the sales tax issue through that 0.09 issue. And I don't see that changing with them. I just don't think there's going to be even as much that they can do, because their budget leadership is going to be quashing anything that costs the state more money. I also think that this is probably not something that probably not something that all of you will want to hear, but when the state is looking at new revenue sources for itself, the one exception that you might be able to get some help is if you are willing to, if there were a county component to that you would benefit from, if you would be willing to work with them on that. But I know that that's not something that would be exciting for many of you to do. It's very similar to when there's a new transportation package on the table where there's projects in it that benefit the jurisdiction but require a new gas or other tax increase. I just I think I know that's hard for many of you. I just think that's the blunt politics of it right now.
So I understand, the issue of the 0.09 bill that has been there. And even those that benefit from that seem to not want to even add anything else, because what that does is that adds revenue taken away from the state. I would suggest maybe we think about something that is very pointed for our own county. And I'm sure that doesn't go over very well in the state legislature because we're only one county. However, we do have a delegation that maybe we could work with, that there would be specific action for our county alone. Unless there were other border counties. As soon as you add a lot of other counties, what we're talking about then is siphoning off. And I honestly believe, as Councilor Mebaji said, that really, is it really going to make that big of a dent if it were only Clark County? And we are unique in the state. I don't know what it's like for counties way north that border Canada. I'm not even sure about that. But with our county, there just is we can't change it. We can't change our location. And I think it would be worth starting a policy issue that addressed our county only. And I understand that makes a lot of work for you, but in the sense of lobbying, but I actually think it should be a very pointed policy thing that deals with us only. And if we could convince our delegation that it's worth it for them to try to convince their colleagues, it's worth trying, I think, because it's a much smaller number. And, you know, just like our 5517, that didn't affect that. In reality, it affected Clark and Okanagan County. Okanagan didn't even really realize they were in there. I mean, by the description. So that took 3 sessions. I understand, but I think we should start working on it now. It may take 3, 6, however many sessions down the road, but really for our health as a county, I think it is worth trying.
Yeah, if I might comment on that, I certainly am not afraid of the work that you're describing. I think it is a good fight. I think the key to that really is continuing to be able to show the entire legislative delegation and maybe legislators more broadly as well, what exactly is going on in the Clark County budget. Making sure that they understand the challenges that you're facing, as well as the impact that sales tax has on it. But, you know, also legislators consistently ask local governments, you know, what we've given you local option tools, you know, which tools have you used? And it's frustrating, I understand, because raising a sales tax in Clark County is exactly the problem, right? It doesn't work. It just makes you less competitive. And I think that's a legitimate answer. I've heard legislators respond to that. But being able to answer those questions and have a good story, and not that I'm saying making things up, but having your story down about the budget, I think really is the key. I will also just tell you that I know that I'm not sure, we haven't talked recently about your current budget status, but I know that, you know, a lot of jurisdictions at this point are realizing that the impact from COVID is maybe not going to be as bad as they thought. My impression is that's not the case in Clark County. And so I think there's going to be a there's going to be some distinctions being made between city services that are being provided and county services that are provided right now because of the public health and emergency management services that are provided at the county level. And I think the state really understands that better now than they have. I've seen them before.
Okay, thank you. Our tools, I mean, you know, raising taxes so that we can heal our problem of a structural deficit from people that go across the river.
Mm-hmm.
It is not going to be effective. It's just
right.
It's a total. It's opposite of what we want, because what we want is to be able to keep more of our revenue, not ask that our constituents pay more. So. Mm-hmm. Great. I understand what you're saying. Certainly, they want to know. We'll tell them. We'll tell them what tools. Right. Other questions of the council or comments?
I have a quick one. So Josh, you talked about October trying to be sort of when we want to get our priorities in place. So I guess maybe it's a question for Lindsay and Kathleen in terms of what our process going forward looks like in terms of looking at what we had on the agenda last year, you know, updating that, reviewing that, and then trying to decide on what path we want to take for our current priorities. So is that something then that we'll start working on here in council time over the next couple of months? Or I guess kind of curious about steps of process to get to where you think we need to be in October.
Yeah, I think that, you know, certainly some discussions in one-on-ones, certainly some discussions in council time. You know, I think it would be good probably for the next week and then follow up maybe the week of the 17th in one-on-ones and then in council time that week. to be thinking about, the information that Josh has presented. Obviously, the 0.09 issue, the two priorities that we've sort of been noodling on this interim really are those operational budget priorities. And the 0.09 bill, though it's a policy bill, similarly would have a tremendous operating budget impact. And so while we can have those operating budget priorities, I think it's important, as Josh said, to be really realistic about that. So I think it's important too to be thinking about whether or not there are other policy bills that we would want to put forward, and capital budget requests that maybe we could put forward as well, and then to touch base again, like I said, the week of the 17th, week of the 24th, and really try and nail down what those priorities would look like. And at this point, it's okay to have a broader list, then can be narrowed down in early September, and then we can really start working on getting all of the information that we need in the first part of September, and then be ready to be meeting with our legislative delegation by mid to late September.
Your question, Councilor Olson? Okay. Anybody else? Any other comments?
I just want to segue off of what you said, and basically, I want to double down on what Josh suggested on reaching out to our legislative delegation especially across the aisle. We've had very helpful, to some extent, the weekly meetings regarding mainly focus on COVID, but we really need to double down on that and build more relationships so we can help rally the advocacy across the aisle to the benefit of Clark County. And if capital projects are something that's more of a palatable target, I think we should prioritize that. Just as John said, we need to defend what's on the table right now, but also see if we can move other projects forward. So I agree with what the chair said about maybe focusing the legislation. I know I got some pushback initially when I brought up this sales tax leakage issue, but there's well documentation on it. Our local finance office can put the numbers together. They already have it. I think we could create the narrative and show what a bill could and should look like, just specific to Clark County, because we are so dissimilarly situated and we are in such an unfair position compared to the other counties in the state. So I really urge that we do make it a priority, as well as the capital projects, and reaching out and having consistent meetings with our local legislative delegation. I'm really in favor of that.
Okay.
So I have a question and comment. I think I definitely want to make sure that we keep our eye on the operating priorities, knowing what a tough year it's going to be. Those are nonetheless really important for us. And on the capital, not wanting to miss that potential opportunity, I would hope that we would be able to connect, especially with Vanessa's shop, on community services for possibilities that are out there, projects that we may be able to garner the support for. We know we have a lot of need there. And I'm also interested in keeping an eye on what might be coming down the pike regarding flexibility on REIT and 1406. And hearing what you said, Josh, about what they come up with may not necessarily work for counties, but keeping an eye on that so that if something does, we can jump on that. And while, we can pursue trying to come up with a county-specific proposal, that's fine. We can also, cover our bets. And if there is going to be conversation about lifting, or in some specific ways lifting that 1% cap, there may not be majorities on this council one way or another, but I, as a councillor, would be interested in following that conversation as well.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if it's appropriate, but I would just interject that proposal on the 1% was a local option. So it doesn't mandate, that you take additional property taxes, just to be clear.
Thank you.
It seems to me in the past, Josh, that Wasac has never had a majority of counties that wanted to do that. I know that King County was really wanted to raise that option, but in the meetings that I've been in with executive committee and the legislative steering committee, there wasn't a majority of those who cared to do that as a group. Now that may have changed. Apparently it has, by seeing that Wasac is doing something with it.
Well, I should be clear. Actually, what you're describing is probably a change. In 2016, it was one of the association's top 3 priorities, and it did have a majority. But I think you're very right that I'm not assuming that right now there is a majority that supports it. We'll have to see when they vote on their legislative agenda whether there is or not. You could be very, very accurate in that.
Yeah, I'm not on the LSC now. I observe, but I haven't been participating as much this past year or 2020 with that as the executive. But at any rate, and moving on. Anybody out? Any other comments of councilors before we move to our next item? Lindsay, do you have any comments?
I don't, just to think about what Josh has said, and like I said, if you have any questions, reach out to me or Josh, and then I'll plan on following up with each of you the week of the 17th.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Thank you, Josh. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
everyone. Nice to see you all.
Good to see you. Take care.
You too.
All right. Moving on then to our next item under old business is, that is the last thing. We're going to move to new business, critical area ordinance. And I guess I see Brent is here. Colette's here. I don't see Oliver, but he may be. I can only see a few panels. But at any rate, I will turn it over to whoever is going to start this discussion there from community planning. Christine? Okay. Are you going to do it? I just see you. All right. Okay.
Councillor, I think I will lead it on.
Okay.
Good morning. Good morning,
Morning.
and members of the council. Good to see all of you. And this is discussion to have with the council on the county critical area ordinance update. In a way of background, the Growth Management Act requires counties and cities in our development of our comprehensive plan also to develop our development regulation to protect the state natural resources and critical areas. In Clark County, the county critical area is in Title 40.4. There are 4 areas that make up the county critical area ordinance: wetlands, wildlife habitat, flood hazard areas, geological hazard areas, and then critical aquifer and recharge areas. Those are the 5 areas that make up the county critical area ordinance. Since 2006, there haven't been any major review or update to the critical area ordinance, and I believe Brent will discuss that as he goes through the memo that we prepared for the interim council and provided to the council. So the only thing I will add is that I'm aware that both Department of Ecology and Commerce have given us some leeway. I don't think they will continue to do so. So Brent will discuss that as we have this conversation with you. We know that the critical area ordinance needs to be updated, and staff would like that update to occur prior to the major periodic review that my department will be commencing on with the direction from council. So with that, I will turn it over to Brent to go over what needs to happen. The only thing I also wanted to mention in a way of background, the council is aware that when the Environmental Services Department was created, all the environmental issues was moved to environmental services, the critical areas, endangered species, clean water, recycling, and solid waste. Since the reorganization, many of the staff are now all in different departments. Brent Davis is the go-to staff in terms of expertise and reviews with his team any application relating to the critical area ordinance. So he's our in-house experts, and whatever happens, he will also be leading this effort. The role that community planning will play is to help go through the whatever public process is required. As the council is aware, we are currently updating the shoreline, and Brett can talk about this too. In the process of updating the shoreline, Ecology have raised so many issues relating to the critical area ordinance, and we have been indicating that when we update the critical area ordinance, we will address those issues and not entangle it with the shoreline update. So with that, let me turn it over to Brent. Thank you, councillors. I'm also here, as well as Dan Young, and I know our legal counsel are also online to answer questions that you may have, councillors. Thank you.
There we go. Okay. Good morning, councilors. I'm Brent Davis. I'm the Wetland and Habitat Review Manager. So just to clarify a little bit, my expertise is in the wetland and the fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas, and the two ordinances we have related to that. Development engineering staff generally are the folks that deal with our other three critical areas. They're more engineering related. But the primary issues that we have in terms of having to look at updates are to the wetland and the habitat conservation ordinances. We have had a laundry list of concerns on the wetland ordinance from Fish and Wildlife. I'm sorry, from Ecology since the 2006 update. They up until recently haven't pushed back on us too hard on those issues, but every time we go through some kind of review process or even on a project level, getting SEPA comments from Ecology, the issues continue to come up. And they're primarily related to provisions that we currently have related to the reduction of wetland buffers to provide developers with more flexibility when the buffers get substantial. And so based on the feedback that we got from Ecology in our shoreline update, it's very clear that they are essentially not going to, or are going to be looking at cutting us less slack with these provisions. So the primary one that you'll probably hear about is related to reductions that we allow when people can do low impact development or infiltrate their stormwater. We essentially treat their development as having less impact on the wetlands so that they can get a smaller buffer. And we've had several projects in the last few years that may have been very challenging if they couldn't get those reductions. So we've already had some feedback from DEEB about that particular issue. They're concerned about it. We also have a situation, the habitat ordinance in 2006, we negotiated with Fish and Wildlife to reduce the riparian areas from their recommended levels for the smaller streams, the non-fish bearing streams. I honestly don't know where Fish and Wildlife is at on that issue, but I am concerned that they are going to push back harder on that. So we're not going to necessarily go into the project proposing those changes, but we anticipate that we will get substantial pushback on that issue. So under the Growth Management Act, we're required to consider best available science when we adopt our critical areas ordinance. And essentially the situation we're in is that the state agencies, in coordination with the Department of Commerce, has done a substantial amount of work to provide guidance to local governments that meets that best available science test. And so we have guidelines from Ecology on wetlands and wetland buffers. We have guidelines from Fish and Wildlife on priority habitats and species and management recommendations for those that generally guide our standards in our ordinance. What we were able to do in 2006 is work with some local experts to essentially provide some more localized analysis. And at the time, Ecology's guidance was relatively new and a less substantial body of work. And so we were able to get to a point where our proposals varied from their guidelines, and Ecology at that time wasn't supportive of our position, but they chose at that time not to challenge our adoption. I'm quite concerned this time that they're going to push back a lot harder on those issues. It's just the level of feedback that we get, again, through Shoreline and through project level comments has changed substantially in the last couple of years. So what we presented in the staff report is two options on how we can pursue this update. And the first option is essentially looking at our codes to, in comparison to the guidelines from the state agencies, and essentially making the revisions to be consistent with those guidelines. We'd still have to go through public process and do that, but it's essentially a pretty straightforward path in terms of getting to updates that are consistent with the guidelines and consistent with GMA. Option B is a little more complex and would mirror what we did in 2006 with technical advisory groups with the appropriate expertise, stakeholder group, going through a lengthy public process that could take up to 2 years with those groups to try and come up with policies that either rely on scientific information that we could generate locally, or meet the show your work test for varying from the guidelines suggested by best available science. And so if you look at the estimated cost for those two options, option A, we've estimated is, first of all, that can be done in a time frame of a year or less, and would likely cost $40,000. Option B would be more substantial, could take up to 2 years, and cost approximately $260,000, with about $150,000 of that being reserved for outside consultant to carry the load, because we don't have the staffing resources to manage that kind of a project currently. So the staff recommendation on this at this time is to pursue option A. We're here to get your feedback. Thank you.
Questions of the council?
Yeah, I have a question.
Councilor Olson?
Pull this thing back up here. So I'm looking at the staff report, and it says the, kind of in the last section, it says the habitat section needs adjustment for repair. And I'm talking about this in the context of the issues and concerns that you mentioned with regard to ecology, that it needs adjustment for riparian habitat along non-fish bearing streams. The wetlands section would include new buffer standards, flexibility for stormwater facilities, and agriculture exemptions. So in this option A, are you planning to make any changes or adjustments in the code based on the pushback that we're getting from ecology, or are you planning to kind of keep it status quo? I'm just curious about what updates you're planning if we were to go to option A versus a full-on, hiring our own or doing our own best available science work.
Brent, you're muted.
I'm sorry. Under option A, we would be looking at making substantial changes to the wetland ordinance to address those areas where our buffer standards are not consistent with Ecology's guidelines and Commerce's guidelines. The mention on the habitat ordinance, we know those standards vary substantially from the management recommendations for riparian areas. They were adopted in 2006. We would not propose to change those unless we got substantial pushback from Fish and Wildlife, and it looked like that was a significant risk moving forward. With regard to the agricultural exemptions, that is, there's our hearings board cases and court cases. We need to address how we handle that, particularly in the wetland ordinance. And what we would be looking to there is to move to a model that we already have in place for riparian habitat, where we're essentially telling the landowners that if they want to be exempt from those standards, they need to follow federal best management practices. And we currently provide resources to the Clark Conservation District to assist landowners in that capacity. So we would be proposing to essentially take that model and apply it to the other types of priority habitat and to the wetlands as well. It's a very hands-off model for us. But yeah, the substantial changes would come in the form of the wetland buffer standards. At least, the substantive changes to the standards. One of the other things that I would like to do, and we would have the resources to do in this proposal, is to combine the wetland and habitat ordinances into a single ordinance to streamline the procedural aspects and to clarify areas where there are some differences in the two codes and how we apply very similar standards. It creates a lot of confusion for us and for our applicants trying to navigate when you're dealing with both. So we would be proposing to essentially bring it together, and for the most part, the standards would essentially not change. It would just be reorganized, with the exception of those wetland buffer standards.
Okay, and then I guess given the feedback we've gotten from Ecology and various other jurisdictions, or if we were to consider doing our own best available science study, and I really don't want to answer this question. I mean, I guess, are we going to see anything substantially different if we did our own study versus the body of work that now is already in place since we updated this last?
That's a difficult question to answer. I honestly think we would have to essentially bring data to bear from local knowledge. That would be really the area, because Ecology has done a nationwide survey of thousands and thousands of documents in the literature and compiled it. I think we would be essentially trying to look at local information. A lot of this would hinge on the relationship between stormwater and wetlands. And so, part of what we maybe end up doing is essentially coming to different conclusions in ecology on some of the same information, as opposed to, having not an entire body of novel information. So there would be some risk there that, if we don't do a complete job of that analysis and can't defend our conclusions, there would be more risk with that route.
Does that answer your question? Okay. Are there other questions of the council? I have some, but.
And I do, Madam Chair.
Councilman, did you?
So, and I don't know if I'm drilling down too deep on this, but when you mention fish-bearing streams, what is that based on? I mean, is that historical? Does it go back 10 years, 40 years? The current condition of the stream? Can you? And then the second part of that I may be drilling down too deeply, the biofilter in the south shore of Lacamas Lake, is that considered a wetland or any portion of it by Ecology or the county?
To answer the first question, fish-bearing stream, it's actually defined in WAC 222, the forest practice rules. And it's essentially based on physical characteristics of the channel, things like the gradient, and the size of the channel, and it really comes down to whether or not fish can be that channel can support fish at some point in their life cycle, and so that could include in some cases seasonal streams. So we generally get the designations based on mapping that's maintained by the Washington Department of Natural Resources. They have a hydrologic model that they maintain statewide that predicts when streams are going to be fish bearing versus non-fish bearing, and then we field verify it when we do individual project reviews. We coordinate with Department of Fish and Wildlife when there's questions about whether or not it meets the criteria. In forest lands, landowners can go to the Department of Natural Resources to challenge their designation and argue that it should be a different type. But outside the forest lands, that falls to the county and to Department of Fish and Wildlife during individual project reviews. With regard to the question about the South Vancouver Lake, a significant portion of that is wetland.
Washougal.
I'm sorry.
It wasn't Vancouver Lake. It's in Washougal, Lacamas.
Lacamas Lake?
Yes.
Okay. On this, so I'm not familiar with a specific facility in that location.
Okay, then we can skip that then.
Okay.
I don't. As far as Plan A, if we start going down that road, and I certainly want a simplified process, a least expensive process, and one that's more in line with what Ecology supports. But as we go down that road and the changes that you were just indicated to Councillor Olson, if it really looks like our DEEB, the engineer board is going to say, oh my gosh, we're going to kill off a lot of otherwise good developments. Is there a way to keep track of where we are in that process so we don't kind of get it so far astray that then we would decide, oh boy, we need to take another look at this and stop this Plan A process and get more to a Plan B process. So is there a way to lift and shift if we start getting too many objections from the engineers?
I think that's always a possibility. There are some timing concerns because, as Oliver mentioned, ideally we would like to get this update done prior to the periodic update. But statutorily, we're not required to have it done until 2024. So there is room for that flexibility if we get to that point in the process where it's clear that we need to step back and, slow down and maybe do some heavy lifting on trying to address some of those concerns.
Does that answer your question, Councilor Medvedi?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I have a couple of questions. One, I'm just wondering if the Department of Ecology statewide, have they been affected? Have their rules and things been affected at all since 2017 when something about Rivers Act, a federal act, was removed by President Trump, and it was significant. I know that anybody that deals with ecology, et cetera, realizes what a huge move that was. I'm wondering if the Department of Ecology is, if that has affected any of their rules at all. You can set that aside for a minute, and then it sounds to, and then I'm go on here a minute to option A and option B. I see them both problematic. I see option A being problematic because it sounds to me like we're gonna be more onerous. Whatever moves that you take, it sounded like your answer to Councilor Olson is it will be more onerous. We're going to have to move back these lines, and that doesn't appeal to me. What's problematic about option B is the cost. However, if there are unique things in Clark County that we have to address, I think we need to do it. And then as far as under option A, your comment about bringing together the wetland and the habitat ordinances, I don't actually see why that can't be done on an ongoing basis. I think it should be. You should bring that to us and say, can we put some of these conflict? We want to make it more easily attainable and understood, and that should be an ongoing process. That's the way I see it. When you see that things don't mesh or they're difficult, that you should come to us and ask us, can we look at this and join these two and work on that on an ongoing basis? So I guess those are my comments. I'll let you comment or answer any of those things. First, starting with the since 2017 and changes that may have taken place that should benefit us.
Certainly. So Ecology was not, and their guidelines and they come from state law, and they're not really affected by the federal regulations. That rule change substantially affected how the Corps of Engineers operates under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. It does limit Ecology's role under Section 401 of the Clean Water Act as the water quality certifier, because they simply be seeing less projects. But it doesn't change their authority under the state Clean Water Act and under growth management. With regard to the other comments, if the council wants us to pursue option B, I think we can certainly go that route, and we'll do our best to create a defensible standard that we can carry forward. And with regard to combining the ordinances, it is a substantial undertaking, just in terms of the amount of work that needs to be done to make sure that nothing substantively is changing, and that nothing critical is getting left behind. And it's just not something that is generally in my work program, because our primary focus is implementing the code and issuing permits. And I just saw this as an opportunity to accomplish that goal.
Okay, other questions or comments by the council? I guess,
Yes.
okay, Councilor Lynn.
I would be at this point more supportive of option A. I would differ from the perspective that it is more onerous if we're already getting pushback on some of these rules, and if part of this work would be to try to change them so that we better fit the needs of ecology and the best available science, then I think that makes more sense for us to do. I know that if we were to go with option B, that staff would certainly do their best to come up with whatever they could to defend the positions. But I think that we'd be setting ourselves up potentially for, as Brent said, probably a bit more trouble if those standards weren't defensible. And I am not inclined to believe that we have different science down here that would change the outcomes dramatically. So in the interest of both time and budget and a workable, defensible plan, I would be more supportive of option A.
Councilor Lance, I just want to comment. I wasn't saying there was different science. I was saying the scientific findings in Clark County may be different than what the Ecology uses as a very broad standard. That's what I was saying. There is no different science. Science is science.
Glad to hear you say that. Thank you.
I've got a question, actually. So maybe Oliver or Chris, you can answer this. So let's kind of work our way through this, and we update these ordinances. And this is under the GMA. If it's not adequate, if it's not to where Ecology says we're in line or we're out of line in some way, how does that get processed, adjudicated? I mean, is this a litigation issue if we don't get our act together in the way that others might find appropriate? That's, I guess, my concern too, considering what options are available, what concerns or issues or pushback we've been getting from Ecology over the last 14 years. So I'm just curious about, if we walk through this to the end and we don't do the job that we need to do, what that looks like.
Councillors, I don't know if I'm muted or not. Provide you a better answer. I can only report and share with the council that early this year, I received a call from Department of Commerce as it relates to our critical area ordinance. And I wouldn't say I did anything special, but I was able to provide very limited update that was done, wetland typing, the adoption of the flood hazard area, and very limited amendment that was made through biannual code. I used that for the fact that we also cited those limited amendments in the adoption of the 2016 plan update to buy some time. And as a result of those provisions, they let us slide, because what prompted that question or call was when the Clean Water Division applied for a grant, they were ready to deny that if our critical area ordinance wasn't in compliance. So, but I think Chris will answer your other legal jeopardy question.
So, first of all, any changes that we make that are GMA governed are subject to appeal to the Growth Management Hearings Board. So that is a risk of making any change. The extent to which the changes that we make are different from what the agency might recommend as best available science, when best available science is the standard, I think that risk increases. So there's that. This year, we made our last payment on the Clean Water Act settlement from the stormwater litigation. So to the extent that any of these changes would impinge upon the requirements of the state under the Clean Water Act, you know, we also have a risk there. And yes, that the changes that we made in 2009 that Ecology agreed with at the time were appealed to the Pollution Control Hearings Board. And once they that board ruled against the county, then the appellants took that ruling to federal court and said, look, the county has violated the Clean Water Act and should be punished. So those are the risks. And the extent to which those risks operate depends, I think, on how much anything that the county came up with deviated from what Ecology has in its guidelines.
Thank you. And that's kind of what I was, and if I remember correctly, that fine that we just finished paying off was well over $3 million. Wasn't it, was it 3.6 or something? Anyway, so that's, I wanted to make sure that we all understood that there's risk, that we don't have a very good track record in this area.
And expense that goes beyond the expense of hiring a consultant and putting together the ordinance. You know, we lost money because of the unfavorable ruling from the Growth Management Hearings Board because we were ineligible for grants and loans. So we're out of that penalty box right now. And but that is a risk when doing things that are subject to GMA.
So just my one last comment, I would then, as we move this conversation forward, I would support option A for now.
Other councilors want to chime in?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilor Blum.
For the reasons that Chris laid out, that option A, for the cost and for the need to get in compliance with the state, would be the best route forward.
I guess that's your direction. You got 3 votes to do that, so. There you have it.
Okay, councillors, if I may, I will say thank you for Dan and staff because today is the last day to submit budget to budget office. I'm sure that Dan and staff will take this on and submit whatever needs to be submitted to the budget office so that the cost for them is covered. So I sincerely appreciate this conversation with council. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Okay, moving on to councilor reports. It actually is, I wanted to mention, first of all, the phone call this morning with Senator Murray. Councilor Blum and I had a brief conversation with Senator Murray, and there was kind of a bad connection for her. So she stayed as long as she could, and then we had a little bit of conversation with the staff about asking really if they had any influence with the governor to help us get the funds that really are coming to a county that's our size, which is just slightly under 500,000. And, and as we all know, we're missing out on those extra funds. We asked that that any influence that she might be able to have in the governor's office, or they would help with that. She talked a lot. And so did the staff actually talk about, this upcoming, the negotiations that are going on right now for a future similar CARES Act type funding. So, and they're in rigorous negotiations regarding that. So she did focus on that, although I tried to bring him back to, what can you do for us now and how we could use it? So that's one thing. The other thing I want to bring up is the listening session. You've all seen the kind of the back and forth that have gone that first came from the attorney Tim Murphy, and when he was giving feedback on the listening sessions. One thing I want to say is that I believe that we as a council should stand firm in the idea that our rules and procedures, this is a public meeting, we are meeting as the council, and therefore our rules and the moderator should be very familiar with our rules and abide by those rules. And it sounded in the last email that came from the Jessica that this next listening session may be a little bit raucous. That's what it sounded like to me. That was kind of the implication, that emotions will get high and possibly this next listening session may be a little bit raucous. And I would just ask that as a council, we stand together and follow our rules. This will be a public meeting. And I would ask the county manager to maybe ask the moderator to be very familiar with our rules so that she can study them and carry them through. We are paying for this moderator. And so I think that that's the very least that we can expect regarding that. So that's one thing. And then I have one other thing that I want to bring up, and then we can go around and discuss maybe anything that, any response to what I've said. But we also have seen, we are going to have something coming before us in either a hearing or in council time regarding the Cowlitz tribe and an agreement, a public safety certification issue. And what I would like to ask us to do as a council is to maybe even ask for a little bit more information from the tribe if they are willing to give it to us. For instance, as we're looking at that particular thing, we should look at their policy and see their policies and procedures for public safety as it is, and maybe their use of force issue, what they do when there's a use of force, or how they can use of force, how they document it, who reviews it. I've had a conversation with the sheriff, and so I would like to ask that hopefully there's agreement that we can ask the tribe for this documentation prior to our voting on, passage of this. I know that our PA, Tony Golick, has looked this over as well as the sheriff's office. So, they've looked at it, but we're the final voice in it. And I would just ask if the council would agree to maybe be asking for a little bit more documentation on that. So I'm finished. So I would, anybody else who has any comments or has reports, go ahead. Councilor Medji, your mic's off.
Yeah, I just unmiked. Thank you. I just want to comment too, because I was participating in some of those emails back and forth, and I was regarding the listening session. So I was really concerned that between the attorney and even the lead of the NAACP, that they weren't differentiating between fact and insults and fair dialogue. I think we need, and I want to differentiate because I've heard the term tone policing. We're not tone policing. We want full and robust discussion. We want to listen. And I think everyone needs not to listen. This isn't a one-way conversation. But we do have a code of conduct in place, and it is a formal government hearing. We need to have those rules abided by, and the moderator needs to be aware of that, as well as all the participants. So I don't want to have an out of control. This isn't a playground. This isn't a town square. This is a government hearing. And so I would concur with the chair that we need to be firm in how it's conducted. Otherwise, I would question moving forward with it, because I'm not going to just create a forum at taxpayer expense where people just throw slander and libel and insults at the council or elsewhere. It's not appropriate. So I'm hoping that we do stand firm. I would make the same request of the manager to have that discussion with the moderator.
Chair Claring, if I may. I did ask Emily and legal to take a look at what the current code of conduct and other documentation and parameters that we have, just to give her analysis on what that looks like with regards to the listening session. And I know Emily is on right now, so if she could provide some feedback for everybody so we're all on the same page on what that means, that would be helpful.
Good morning. There is some limitations on the rules of procedure that can be in place due to, obviously, our constitutional right for free speech. So the leading cases out there do say that speech in a public forum is considered a limited public forum when it's a council meeting. And so the county council does have the authority to place some limits on public speech. They have discretion to cut off speech when they reasonably perceive it to be or eminently to threaten a disruption of the orderly and fair progress of the discussion. So it does have to be reasonably perceived to be an actual disruption of the business of the governing body. There's also a case out there that said, I think it's probably important for me to quote this, a government entity is justified in limiting its meeting to discussion of specified agenda items and imposing reasonable restrictions to preserve the civility and decorum necessary to further the forum's purpose of conducting public business, but any restriction must not discriminate on the basis of the speaker's viewpoint. So there's some limitations. Our rules of procedure may perhaps go a bit further than is constitutionally permitted because it doesn't just limit it to disruption of council business. but I did want to make sure it was clear to the council what the current legal authority is on those limitations.
So Emily, you're saying that our rules and procedures now go beyond the Constitution?
It
Is
does.
that
It
you're saying?
probably should be clarified that there has to be a disruption to the council meeting, and there can be reasonable restrictions. For example, the one reasonable restriction is the amount of time that people have to speak. We have a time limit. Because if somebody keeps talking for too long, that would be a disruption of county business, for example. So there's some things that we might want to clean up the next time we work on the rules of procedure, just to clarify that it is within the parameters. But there is the requirement that it must be reasonably perceived as to disrupt county, the orderly conduct of county meeting.
But we have in our rules and procedures, and I know if it's not stated, and I think it is stated, I'd have to look it up, but since I've been here and probably before, there's a standard where we don't call people out, and that really does go for anybody testifying. I've gavelled or asked witnesses who mention a specific name of a county employee, even, that they not do that. So you're saying that goes beyond what we can do?
I think it's perfectly reasonable to request that individuals refrain from that conduct. But then when you go to the point where you cut somebody off or you have them escorted, that's where we have to be careful about how far we're going with restrictions on free speech. I mean, I have also been present at a number of meetings where there's been conduct and communication from the dais that, you know, you wonder if it goes too far, certainly. I do think it's reasonable for the chair to indicate that they believe that the communication is unreasonable and not furthering, you know, the interests of the reason that everyone's present. So I just wanted to make sure it was clear that we're not impeding on free speech rights. We're doing the balance that needs to happen because this is a limited public forum. There is an ability to do some restrictions, but we have to be careful about how far we go.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
I can also comment, by the way, on the public safety agreement if people are curious about that.
All right.
I don't know if
Sure.
people are, but I can certainly give a little bit more information about that.
Okay. If you'd like to, go ahead.
I don't know if there's more discussion about the community.
Okay. Yeah. Any further discussion about the rules and procedures?
Yes. First of all, it was Jasmine, not Jessica, who sent an email last night that I'm looking at. And you indicated, Councillor Queering, that you thought her email said that things were going to get raucous. I don't see anything in the email that indicates that. And while I do support encouraging proper conduct during all of our meetings, and we should at all times, from all of us and from those speaking with us, encourage that. I didn't feel that what happened on Friday night was a direct insult. And I think that there may be other things that occur that are not direct insults. And someone saying that they disapproved of something that was said by a council member is not an insult. And in these listening sessions, we may all hear things we are uncomfortable with, that we may not want to hear. And I believe that the letter from Jasmine was really trying to get at that point. that there are a lot of people in this community who are upset by what you said. And the purpose of the listening sessions is to hear from our community. And there's a chance that some of those people will say that they didn't like what you had to say. I would hope that as elected officials, we are able to hear those criticisms and work through them. I think that it is absolutely reasonable to ask the county manager to talk with the moderator and ensure that if things were to get, quote, raucous, that they would be controlled. But I certainly hope that this council doesn't go in the direction of trying to control what it is that we hear at listening sessions.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I am
Councilor
very,
Manager.
I'm very troubled by that, you know, saying someone is ignorant, saying that it's a fact, saying that that's not an insult, that's beyond the pale. And that's
Councilor
what we're
Medvedji,
getting
had
at.
you
And
been
having
listening,
a lawyer on behalf
had you
of
been listening, you would have
Councilor
heard
Lance,
that that is
Councilor
not
Lance,
what happened.
state that
Please
position
do.
is untenable. That is not, it is disruptive. It is not productive. It is not conducive of their own rules and stated procedures that the listening session moderator stated. So I'm sorry, Councilor Lentz, but that's a ridiculous statement. And I'm not gonna participate in a listening session that's a free for all where people are free to insult one another. That's not what this is intended to do.
Once again,
Councilor Lance, okay. Just a moment. Let's not talk over each other, number one, because you were interrupting Councilor Medvedji when he was trying to make a point.
You just interrupted me.
So, and I wanted to say, prior to your defending whatever it is you're ready to defend, that I wanted to say that the Mr. Murphy did not just say he disapproved of what I said. So I just wanted to clarify that. Maybe because it wasn't directed at you, you didn't quite hear it the same way that I did. But so you go ahead. I just want to say he said more than that he disapproved. Furthermore, he placed as a you know, something on the screen. He had my statement, okay, and named it as fiction, and then his facts. So it was clearly seen what I had said by the fact that he placed it there for everybody to read, which is fine. I did say it. I stand by what I said. I continue to stand by what I said. That isn't what is the problem to me. I don't need to be demeaned or degraded because of what I said, because of my opinion of what I said. So now you may speak, Councilor Lentz.
Thank you, Chair Quiring. I think that
Quiring is how you pronounce the name.
Okay, I think that had you been listening, you would have heard that Mr. Murphy said the statement was ignorant. And it is actually a very good example of systemic racism to have the chair of a county government claim that systemic racism doesn't exist when it is factually proven that it does. Now, we could continue to debate that back and forth, but I certainly hope that this council will, rather than say they don't want to hear things that they disagree with, will embrace the opportunity to hear from segments of the community they don't often hear from.
I'm certainly not saying I don't want to hear from people in the community. What I'm saying is when we hear from them, it should be in the same manner that anybody is expected to come before the dais and speak to the council So that's my point. There needs to be decorum. So that is my only point, actually. So moving on, any other comments about this particular facet here?
I just have, so in our rules of procedure, it's under public comment, section K, whatever the number is, 7K talks about public comment and people addressing the council. And specifically, it says that they won't make comments about private activities, lifestyles, or beliefs of others, including county employees or elected officials. And then persons addressing the council will refrain from conduct, statements, or remarks that are uncivil, rude, vulgar, profane, and otherwise disruptive to conducting county business. So I think that's kind of broad, but I do have a concern that we need to be careful about shutting down speech, that especially as elected people, we're more available to be criticized because we're in this political environment. And while I would say at any point in time somebody is addressing our staff and they're speaking ill of our staff, that is shut down immediately. Being criticized as a public official comes with the job. We do things, we say things, we make decisions, we make votes, and that's part of our responsibility to do those things and also to bear the criticism from our constituents when we make those decisions or make statements or whatever it is we do in campaigns or in our the way we do our business on the council. So, but if the statements get rude and vulgar and out of line, I think it makes sense to keep some sort of decorum, but I want to be careful about how we might shut down people who, in fact, Councilor Quire, in your words, who might get passionate and speak with passion, and they might not say things that we like and that we want to hear. That's part of what we do as elected people, is listen to criticisms based on how we do our work. So I just want to make that statement. I hope that we can all just listen a little bit more. And if we have the opportunity to hear from people we don't typically hear from, I'm open to that. And I may or may not agree with everything that I hear, but I don't want to argue about it. I just want to hear from them and hear what they have to say. And I hope that we can do that as a council.
My hope is that some of the people who have been writing to me, actually, and a little bit fearful about speaking out, will indeed speak out. Because many of you have not been copied on these emails that I've received. So I hope they too will speak. It's not about an argument, it's about their experience. So
what would they be afraid of? The people you're talking about?
Actually, what they would be afraid of, actually, they've told me they're afraid that their business will be harmed by people who take action against them because of what they've said, that their children will be harmed and targeted, that their grandchildren will be harmed and targeted. That's what they're afraid of, and they have said that.
Targeted and harmed by
mob. People, by the same kinds of mobs maybe that are in Portland and have been destroying property and things. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, we haven't really seen that here in Clark County, so.
And we don't want to.
No, we don't.
They're not speaking out, so they don't see it. My point? Okay.
I don't think that's reasonable.
Okay, I'm sorry that you don't think it's reasonable. Thanks for your input. Councilor Medjugorje?
I was just going to reiterate, I appreciate what Councilor Olson just said, and there's great truth in that. I want to have this listening session. I want the county manager to talk to the moderator and go over the rules and ground rules to make sure that the moderator controls this as she's being paid to do.
Okay, other councilor reports? So Emily, do you Does anybody want to hear anything further about this agreement? I see some nodding.
Yeah, it would be difficult for me to try to say I want more information about something I know nothing about. So
Okay,
it would be
all
helpful.
right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, I muted myself.
ahead, you're
All right,
muted.
so there's it started about a year ago. I received a request from the attorney for the Cowlitz Indian tribe. As you may or may not know, the tribe does have their own tribal police. They're called the Cowlitz Indian Tribal Public Safety Department. And those officers, many of whom are actually former deputies in our own sheriff department, do go through the Criminal Justice Commission for their training. And there is a statute, it's under RCW 10.92 is the chapter, it's called the Tribal Police Officers Act. And this statutory scheme allows for tribal police officers to in fact become general authority Washington state peace officers, which means they can enforce not just tribal ordinances on individuals on the reservation, but in fact state law. So the statutory scheme requires that the tribe and the local law enforcement jurisdiction where the reservation is located enter into an interlocal agreement. It's actually fairly specific. It provides requirements for the tribe to make sure that the officers go through the Criminal Justice Training Commission, that the officers are certified by the State Office of Financial Management to have appropriate levels of liability insurance and property insurance. And under the interlocal agreement, there needs to be some indication for how there's cooperation between the local jurisdiction and the tribal law enforcement officers on enforcement of general laws of the state of Washington. So I received reach out from the tribe a year ago. I engaged with the sheriff department as well as with Tony Golick and our chief criminal deputy and our chief deputy to work out some of the terms. One thing I did want you to know is that under this statutory scheme, it is required to enter into this local agreement. And if there is an inability to reach agreement between the sheriff's department or the local law enforcement, in this situation, it is the sheriff's office. If you can't reach an agreement between the two entities, you have to go to mandatory arbitration in order for it to be in place. So the state law really does encourage and move in the direction of allowing tribal law enforcement officers who meet the statutory requirements to become general authority peace officers. So we engaged in this negotiation. We don't need to go into arbitration. We've reached agreement. I'm in the midst of preparing a staff report, which we will make sure, of course, all the counselors have. I envision we'll be having some one-on-one before a hearing. And I've also reached out to the sheriff's department requesting that they identify who in their office would like to be sort of that person to help present the information to the council when it comes before the council, which I anticipate happening very soon. It really depends on getting all this stuff filed and before the council's office before we get it on the agenda. So that's a quick summary. If you have any questions, I'm happy to try to answer.
Are there questions? I know we'll learn more. We'll learn a whole lot more. So
I guess as we go through these additional meetings, we'll get additional information then. It sounds like you've done most of the negotiating and come to an agreement. And
right. And if you have specific questions that you want to make sure we cover during the meeting, feel free to email me and let me know what your questions are so we make sure we're prepared.
Okay, thank you. Other counselor reports? Councilor Medvigi, looks like you're going to your mic.
That's my tell, leaning forward.
Yeah, right.
So I've had some discussions with different parties from Lindsay to Dr. Melnick, and our manager, we have a real issue and problem nationally, at the state level, as well as at our level, at the county level, on what I'll just refer to as medical logistics. As referred to by Dr. Melnick as deja vu all over again, regarding short supplies, especially for the point of care machines, but other areas. And so there's no visibility. There's no one at any level tracking what those consumables are, what supply on hand we have. It's a huge deficit, because if you can't picture what's happening in the supply line, then there's no way to inform it and to react ahead of it before you turn into the black, meaning you have no supplies left. It is, according to Dr. Melnick, some of our care providers have in fact slowed down their testing because of the lack of supplies. We could do something at our level, at the county level, at least to fix what we're seeing. Right now, it's all disparate. Each healthcare provider is following their own medical supply problems, but we have these statewide emergency orders putting restrictions on people, yet we don't have any centralized control of this supply issue. It's a deficit. So I really think we should put some letters together to our congressional delegation, as well as to the state, and then consider what we can do through CRESA and locally to get on top of the supply issue, to at least paint a picture of what the challenges are so we can look for alternatives. I mean, ultimately, this is a national issue as far as avoiding copyrights and proprietary information, where you can, if there's specific pieces of equipment that go to a particular machine, we need to nationalize that and have other vendors produce it for the betterment of our health care delivery system. So I want to raise that issue because I think Dr. Melnick and I had a really good conversation about it the other day, and he really welcomes some support in this area. So I'm kind of looking to brainstorm and see what we can do at the county level, because we could be a model. We could help inform the process. So I'm sorry that was long-winded, but it's a very challenging and going to be a persistent issue as long as we're under the throes of this pandemic.
So are you suggesting we talk about it further and create a better logistic system with?
So what I'd like to do immediately is work with Lindsay and see if we can draft a simple letter to describe the problem, the challenge, and what the proposed solutions would be. And then we'll come up with a target list for who the best audience would be for that.
And what are
Councilor Blum?
What the proposed solutions are? You said nationalize, you want the government to take over private business and manufacturing and distribution? You want to require them to turn over their proprietary data? I'm not sure what solution we have.
Yeah, the first step is to track it locally. What are the consumables for our machines across all of our care providers, so that we know what the supplies are on hand and how many more days we have, whether or not it's constraining our testing ability locally, Clark County centric. That would be a start.
Does that answer your question, John? Or not entirely? Yeah. Okay, well, if you're not opposed to us at least starting to brainstorm, I do think actually knowing what our capabilities are right here would be good. And I don't think that is an issue of proprietary issue, but I mean, So that would be a good place to start, I think.
Yeah, I think knowing what we have locally,
Right.
I have no concerns about that. If we're starting to talk
Yeah.
about going up the supply chain and requiring people to share their shipping information and how many units,
Oh, yeah.
that's where I would have a lot of concern about government interference in private business.
Okay.
Kathleen,
Understood.
what's Cressa's role in all of this? I mean, I think we already sort of have some structure.
So Cressa is a centralized area that we go through for supplies, like PPE and things to help support our local areas. I think this would probably be a good discussion at Board of Health with Dr. Melnick here, because he does have a lot of intimate knowledge on this and what the providers are doing and how much, if there's going to be a burden on them to be asking for some data, and what restrictions there may be in requiring that. I'm not saying I'm opposed to it. I just think he has that relationship with those providers. I do know that, he did mention that this is a national issue. This isn't just a Clark County issue, because everybody in our country, as well as others, we're all competing for the same supplies. And so I know we had a supply truck coming here with supplies, and it got diverted to Florida because they had a higher need than we did. So there are definitely other factors I think that we need to consider when even just talking about locally. I mean, I don't disagree with this conversation at all. I think it's great information to have, but I want to make sure that you guys have realistic information so that we can be realistic on how we can move forward and what the impact could be.
And so I would support having this broader discussion with Dr. Melnick before we ask Lindsay to do anything. Or for me, that makes more sense to get a little bit more information from him in terms of where we are right now.
Yeah, and I would add to what Kathleen just said, there is a distinction between the PPE supplies and then those consumable supplies that I was mentioning that are specific to testing. They're handled completely separate, which is an issue in itself.
And Dr. Melnick did mention in our earlier conversation, there may be opportunities for the council to engage with NACO on a larger scale if it makes sense and if it can actually help with logistics, because they have some ties on a national level as well. But obviously that discussion would need to happen.
Okay. So we'll bring it up at the Board of Health, then have a little bit further discussion at the Board of Health, and maybe get some conclusions anyway about moving forward. Other council reports? And moving on to the agenda. Lindsay, do we have work session, or I know you sent us a grid of our policy issues. You want to go ahead?
I did. I don't have any update beyond that, but obviously if you have questions, let me know.
Okay. All right. We will then adjourn this meeting and go into our executive session for one pending litigation for 10 minutes and one potential litigation for 15 minutes. And I don't believe there's going to be any action afterward. Correct? Potential.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay. All right. We'll adjourn this meeting. We'll see you on the other side. Sign into the executive session meeting. Thank you all.